the topic that we are going to discuss today is what we learned from the last shock that we are already forgetting. So what is the idea behind it is that the last shock that we can immediately, when you ask people the last shock, it is usually the COVID. And before the COVID, it's the 2008, 2009. But if we actually think, there have been more shocks that happened after COVID. The Ukraine war, the Strait of Hormuz, and we are having it. So it is every day. So we can't prepare, for a shock. We are living through it every day. So in such circumstances, how is it, Abhilash, that you and how is it that it was done before? How is it? Previously, we used to say you have to be prepared for a shock, maybe have stores and supplies ready and things like that. But right now, it is always, you can't anticipate what the next shock is going to be. So can you, recollect some instances, as to how introduce your company and yourself, please, and how your company, can you recollect some instances where, the shock that you faced and how you reacted to it, that you'd never anticipated before?
Thank you, Professor.
So that's the same question to all, let's, recollect our experiences on this. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Appreciate it very much. Abhilash, I'm a partner at McKinsey and Company. Truly a pleasure to be with all of you here. It is fascinating that you're asking this question of how institutions adapted to the previous shock and what have they learned and not learned from what they have done there. Given we are in the business of client service, when the pandemic hit, and I used to be working in the US at that time, there was a particular bank where we worked very closely in order to completely help them reimagine on a few different dimensions. How exactly are they going to manage their branch network? How exactly will the digital networks work? How do we reskill people so that people who worked in one part of the bank can be put in other parts of the bank? How do we ensure that we give customer comfort as part of the entire pandemic? And how do we service? So each of those different parts, we essentially worked with a particular institution. 5 years later, when I honestly look at the same institution, all of those bad habits have crept back in, right? So what ended up happening was there was a shock. They all just reacted to it versus responding to that shock and building in place structure and capabilities which are going to be long lasting for the organization. It's something that Elon Musk talks about, which is he talks about putting in place structures which can outlive generations in a particular organization. So that is I think number one. The second component is there are two shocks, if I may put it this way. Some are the big major shocks that we have, which pretty much, regardless of the industry, regardless of the size of the organization, you would have to work through. And Professor, you alluded to a couple of examples there. There are also a few minor shocks which might be industry specific. For example, when we were in the US, there was this infamous incident of 3 banks going down, and pretty much everyone was clamoring for deposits, right? It may not have impacted other industries, but it impacts a particular industry. So shocks can be across a few different dimensions. It could be financial, it could be operational, it could be geopolitical, it could be technological, it could be organizational. So there are a few different dimensions. So at least the learning which we have had from what we have seen is the institutions that honestly set themselves apart, right? And if I, for instance, globally take an example, let's say JP Morgan Chase as an example, and Mr. Diamond in every shareholder letter of his talks about building a fortress balance sheet, a balance sheet which can withstand and survive regardless of what the odds are, right? So number one is putting in place the right structures and systems which have the ability to ensure, regardless of what the shocks are, the organization has what it is in order to withstand and compete. And as they say, never lose a good crisis. So using the crisis in order to do the cleanup that was pending in an organization for a long time. The second component is also the need for hiring and apprenticing talent, which has the ability, honestly, to be what I call as quote unquote squash players. People who can stand at the center of the tee, but then are able to migrate to different parts of the code, but then come back to the T once again, such that they have the agility combined with stability. That's the second part of it. The third is the need to systematically analyze the worst possible option at any point in time, and which is why the role of the risk function in an organization becomes extremely important. So you have got to bake in all the sensitivity analysis around the worst possible scenario. Let's say you are Starbucks. What will happen if there is a massive water crisis? What is there? And they actually do all these scenario plannings. If it's the worst possible case, how do you ensure that you still have what is needed? So that's probably the third piece which I'd.
So my take on it is slightly different, but let me first give you an introduction of who I am. I work with Reliance brands in the fashion and lifestyle space. So in the premium luxury fashion and lifestyle spaces, we represent various brands who we bring to the country and do omni-channel retailing for them. So of course, COVID, as most of us would kind of recognize, was a bit of a force majeure event in everybody's life, where things came to a stop. Many things that we didn't imagine would happen, and we had 900 stores and employees who were used to, young people used to having working 8-9 hours at the stores and commuting 2-3 hours. So large portion of their life revolved around what was happening in that store and in that environment. And suddenly you have a bunch of people, young minds, sitting at home, extremely nervous, not clear as to what's going to happen. So I think what we realized at that time is that having empathy is most important, and making sure that you do what is right. And I think that was, and when we were in it, we didn't know when it would end, and we didn't know. So a lot of people kind of come in and comment post facto and saying, "Acha, Reliance hai to kuch bhi kar sakta hai." But it's not only that; it's every organization kind of stood up to the challenge, because nobody knew how long or how deep this was going to be, and how far-reaching it would be. So what we've realized is, and our take from COVID as an instance, a bit of carry on what he mentioned, is to say that there is a different mindset which you need when you are in a crisis, and a different mindset which you need when it's business as usual. The mindset in crisis is to have more of resilience, and the mindset which is in when business is as usual is efficiencies. And most organizations, a large portion of slippage happens because people start getting into efficiency mode, and we all have a very short memory, and hence we start forgetting and start getting into efficiency mode. The other challenge which we are seeing consistently in our kind of a business, as we're a very people-facing business, we see is that there is no organizational memory that can be created. And that was becoming one of the biggest reasons in terms of our overall preparedness in terms of crisis. So those were some of the things that we took advantage of, and we kind of created different and interesting ways to engage young minds, engage people both in our corporate offices, etc., coming up with interesting things like we created a concept of what was called RBL Alive, and saying create interesting skits, competitions, musicathons for employees, 800-900 people every day, to put up on various groups to get going. Apart from that, of course, there was a whole host of financial impact to it, because as months were passing by, people were not sure in terms of saying, do we have to start course correcting? Do we have to do layoffs? There's going to be a lot of public backlash on what's going to happen. Are incentives supposed to be paid or not paid? What is really necessary? What is not necessary? And I think there we were a bit fortunate, because the parent organization was very clear in terms of healthcare, in terms of support, in terms of whatever else was necessary. They were far more prepared. I think a lot of scenario planning for us happens at a central level. So we didn't have to necessarily worry about many of the things. I think, in fact, we take a bit of the leaf out and say that as an organization, we have the best of both worlds. So on one hand, we have the risk and investment appetite of Reliance as a parent. We conveniently become the mammoth Reliance we want to be, and we conveniently become the small startup in the organization, and where we have the agility and the reflex. And that's kind of always worked for us, where we can cherry pick what roles we want to play. But I think our big takeaway has been is saying, how do you create organizational memory, and how do you make sure that you don't keep slipping from resilience to efficiency, have been the two big takeaways for us.
Hi, I am Ravi. I am the Chief Digital and Information Officer at Exide Industries. We are the largest battery manufacturer in the country. So the last disruption I would like to talk about is COVID-1, and also a lot of changes that is happening in the auto industry as a whole. Right. So COVID, obviously, in hindsight, if you look at it, had lot of positive impact as well, right? Rather than the disruption in itself, right? One of the positive impacts, I being from the digital world, is the acceleration that happened in the digitization and the digitalization across industries, not just in one, right? Because it was forced, right? So for example, in our kind of a setup, we could not have people going out and meeting customers, etc., right? Channel partners and all. So a lot of things which we were trying for so many years, right, in terms of customers adopting systems, etc., to place orders, to get status, etc., right? All that happened very naturally. Right? Also, our own teams internally, right, adopting these technologies. For example, they knew now they can't go and meet a customer face to face, right? So obviously they also took to online methods and VCs and all of that. So what it does is it creates the appetite for organization to adapt and absorb more, right? Because while these look very fundamental, these are important for people to accept what are the different ways of doing business, right? And it is now having a very positive impact in terms of how AI is impacting industries and our capability, both in terms of talent, skills, as well as investments, right, to leverage those capabilities for business benefit, right? So that's the positive part. Obviously, a lot of business model changes happened, etc. Quick commerce came out of COVID, for example, right? And now, yeah, at least in India, the adoption started with that and all of that. So now I'll talk a little bit on automotive also. If you see during this period itself, there are three major disruptions that happened in automotive. It started as connected cars because connectivity was available, right? So all cars started coming up with IoT devices and SIM cards, etc., which transmit information and you can track so much, right? Also came electrification and also came autonomous driving in itself, right? Now, if you think of it, such big disruptions in any industry would traditionally happen once in 10 years or once in 20 years, right? Like the steam engines and all of that, right? Now, these are three disruptions happening at the same time.
Driverless cars are not a reality still.
Yeah, in some places it is, but if you look at it, the ADAS, how that itself, right, in terms of assisted driving, has really come in and become part of every vehicle now. The adoption of that,
The infra part.
yeah, the infra part of it has really accelerated, right? So again, for the organization, what this means is that people start accepting newer thoughts, possibilities as a given, and they take it in stride. You don't have to do so much of selling to the top management on newer ideas, right? That's one. Second, it has also now set in that continuous disruption, as you said, is the way of life. So what in COVID used to be emergency board meetings to set, can we make supply available wherever the demand is, because there were phased lockdowns, etc., etc. Now it has become the way of life. There is every week there is almost an emergency meeting, right? Trying to figure out how can we adapt to this change with more agility, right? Rather than being reactive to every so-called situation.